Welcome to the Market Mystics podcast. I'm Joshua.
I'm Kim. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to December.
Welcome. We made it.
We made it.
It's almost the end of the year.
Almost. I would consider the whole month of December the end of the year just because it always goes by like that.
Yeah, there's so many activities and different things. And I was just looking at our calendar, and I'm pretty sure like every weekend in December, there's something going on.
It's true. I almost titled this episode Long December, like the Counting Crows song, which I love, by the way. And then I was like, December's like the shortest month of the year. I know February has the least number of days, but December's the shortest month.
Feels like it for sure.
It does, always. So today we wanted to talk about last week. We had the distinct honor of being on another podcast with a friend of ours, Gil Hodges, whom you may have heard on our podcast before. He came recently to talk about his new book choices. And before that, he came to just talk and be with us. But we wanted to kind of, touch on some of the things we talked about on that podcast and maybe expound a little bit more on some things that we didn't really get to completely dive deep into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was it was the first time that we've been interviewed by somebody, and it was kind of like, I don't know, I didn't really know what to expect. I felt a little bit strange, like, we put out 2 episodes a week, and yet for some reason last night felt different, like being on somebody else's show.
That's funny.
But it was good, and it was like, yeah, it was a privilege to be able to join their platform for an evening. And I feel like the conversation sort of like wandered for a minute, and then like we found our flow just like we normally do on this show, but it like really clicked. And they had some really good questions that we answered, but just there was a couple things Kim and I were like, oh yeah, like if time would have allowed, I would have told this story and gone into this. And
to what you were talking about in the beginning, I have to tell you, I don't know how I got to this point, but I sat with myself before and I thought, man, I'm kind of nervous about this. And I'm like, why would you be nervous? Like I had this whole internal dialogue. And then I decided I wasn't going to be nervous, but I kind of felt like a little antsy about it. I don't know that it was actually anxious, but it felt different because it's usually just, people who are listening, like you hear our recording, but truly I'm just looking at Josh and we're just having a conversation. Like as we're recording, this is easy. And it was a little different, and it felt like stretching a bit, but it was good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it was live, which is definitely different than the way we do it, and it's really not, shouldn't be that different because we don't ever go back and edit what we do. So it's essentially you're getting the live, raw, uncut stuff. But it felt different. Like when I was talking, I was like, oh, I need to like measure my words a little bit different because I don't want to stumble over it because it's live. And I'm like, why does that matter? Like, I don't do that here. I stumble over my words all the time.
I know. Same. It's funny. I had felt kind of the same thing. And then I almost asked beforehand and I didn't, like if there were any certain like pain points in the group that we need to avoid, because I'm not trying to come on and offend or anything.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I felt like I needed to measure my words a bit more, was because I didn't want to inadvertently like touch on something that's sensitive and people aren't ready for, or it's triggering or something like that. I don't think we did, but
yeah. I think
I was aware of that.
That's like a great segue into like one of the questions that was asked. Because they asked us about episodes that were particularly like meaningful or maybe even stretching. Um, and I think you had some thoughts on that from a guest who really was aware of that same concept that you're talking about.
Yeah. So someone asked someone asked on the podcast that we were on. So they had asked that question, like, is there an episode or something in the podcast that really stretched you or was really impactful? And the only thing that came to mind for me was our episode we did with Truth Seeker. And it wasn't even so much the content that was in the podcast, but it was his posture and position before we even started. There had just been some group of people who did these are quote fingers, expose on him, like exposing him as like a whatever XYZ, like not nice, not loving, not kind thing. And before we even recorded, he came on and he's like, hey, listen, this is coming out. I have tried to talk to them, but I'm not being painted in a good light. And so if you don't want to have me on the podcast and ruin your ratings or make it so people are against you or make things controversial, I completely understand. And that impacted me huge. Like this was big time just internally, because I was like, no, of course we want to have you on. Like the whole reason we want these different people to come on is to hear different perspectives and like where they are, how they got there, what's the wealth they carry. And again, it's not necessarily financial wealth, but like, what is the wealth for the kingdom, right? And it like really solidified in me kind of what we're doing and why. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care if other people say anything good or bad about somebody we're going to talk to. I still want to hear their point of view. And I don't think it makes it any less valuable. And I don't know. I actually think it makes it even more valuable if there are people on this side saying, you are this. Hey, how about we just give a neutral voice to be able to say, well, who are you really? You know? So that was probably the most impactful episode for me, at least this season. And just having him on. And honestly, his heart is like, okay, if you're listening to this episode, you could probably stop now. Sorry. And go and listen to that episode with Truth Seeker, because like, what a good dude. You know, his heart is so much for the Father and for the kingdom. And like, I couldn't say enough good things about him.
Yeah. It really, even just the whole interaction of how that episode came to be, it was like one of our other guests was like, hey, have you ever heard of this guy? You should reach out to him. And it was like months later when we were putting together some interviews, and it was like, yeah, let's just see if he'd be up for, like, he knows nothing about us, we know very little about him, like, would he be up for it? Very quick to respond on social media, very willing to work with us, set up a time like the same week. It was like, hey, are you available? Yeah, great. This is when we record. Cool. I'll be there this day. And it was like easy, simple, no issues. And then, he shows up and it's still kind of like, you're feeling it, you feeling each other out. What's this person like? And it was just, the whole episode was like totally full of love and honor and like an easy conversation.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
What other ones would you say like stretched you a little bit?
I think our interview with Mike Popovich stretched me a bit. There were some things that he said that like, like internally when you go like cartoon urch, right?
Yeah.
Like pump the brakes. And I don't know that I completely disagree with them, but there are things that he said that like almost pushed boundaries or parameters that I didn't necessarily know that I had. And so I would say spiritually, that one stretched me. And I really respected him coming on and just like laying it out. And he knows that people don't agree and it's fine. And I can respect that. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I kind of like to be stretched a bit because if I'm always comfortable, then I'm probably not growing very far or very fast, you know? So that was probably for me. What about you?
We talked about this a little bit before, but we've had a couple guests who've just come and just opened themselves up and kind of at least portions of the episode had vulnerable conversations.
Mm,
And that's always like, it feels like an honor when someone like feels safe with you like that.
yeah. Yeah.
And one of them is someone that we both know and are friends with. And the other one was a stranger. And it was just like, man, there's something in you that trusts something in me, or you wouldn't be willing to share about like intimate things about your life that are painful.
Yeah.
And so some of that like stands out to me when I think about like episodes that I've enjoyed. I mean, there's like, if I think about episodes I've enjoyed, like there's certain interviews we've done or certain conversations we've had where I'm like, oh yeah, like that's meaningful. And I think about it like, well, not all the time, but sometimes I think about this again and again. And then there's ones where it's like, yeah, it wasn't like the most amazing episode or anything, but there was something in it that like felt like that. And
Mm,
it just, um, yeah, we've had just a really fun year. Like we were just looking at our like Spotify Wrapped, which Spotify is not our biggest platform, but it does have a like 2,000 listeners or so on there. Um, but it was just fun to see like the growth we've had and the different listeners and the different countries that people listen to us
mm-hmm.
in.
And it was
Like that's
surprising.
surprising. Like the US was 47% of our listeners. And
I
that's
expected it to be like 97%.
right. Like, I mean, I know we have some friends in other places that listen once in a while. And so I knew it wouldn't exclusively be, but for it to be less than half, I was like, that's like, that's pretty amazing. Like,
Mhm.
there's some things in that that are just like, oh yeah, like that stretches you a little bit.
That's interesting. So let me ask you this: non-interview episodes from this year, this
Mhm.
season, what were some of the most impactful or memorable?
We talked about this on the show last night, but one of my personal favorites was No Apologies, No Offense. Because I really think that that's like when I think about who I want to be as a person, like I want to be confident in my belief systems so that I'm not apologetic, but I'm also not trying to offend you with my own journey. And so that like that was pretty impactful. I don't know, like I think I'd have to go through and like scroll through some of our episodes and be like, "Oh yeah, that one." Like that's what's coming like top of my mind at the moment, but
Mhm.
um yeah, I'm sure there's others. Do you have an answer for that?
Um, I don't know that I do have an answer. I'd also probably have to scroll. Um, and I think this one was from, I don't know if it was season 2 or if it was season 1. There was one about covenant, like the difference between a contract and a covenant. And I've listened to it a couple times, and it's interesting because I listened to it like I didn't, like I wasn't on the show. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of a fascinating thing too. Um, Sometimes we talk about things and it may be rooted deeply in our own opinions, but it might also be like just within the flow of relationship with the Lord, and things come out that you didn't even know that you knew or had within you, and I think sometimes that's awesome. I think often about, I don't even know which episode this was, the one when we talked about, it might have been a flow one. We talked about frequency in the mind of Christ. It was quantum entanglement. That's what it was. And tuning in like a radio, right? Tuning into the flow and being able to participate in the mind of Christ, or with the mind of Christ, I suppose, and with the rest of humanity who's also tuned in. I think about that often, and that just imagery of the radio. Yeah. I think that's it.
I'm scrolling through some of our episodes, and one that jumped out to me was our action series we did in July.
Yes.
Like that was a fun 4 weeks of like, hey, here's like these practical ways that we're tuning in with ourselves and creation and God.
That's true.
That was a fun series to do.
That was fun. I almost mentioned that. I had a conversation with a friend a few weeks ago, something, and she was asking, I don't know, like how do you meditate? What does that look like? Which is a funky question. Like like I don't know. I don't know how to describe that to you. And I wound up telling her a little bit about the action series and connecting with creation and just listening, and how much you can hear if you actually just tune in and you actually just pay attention. And I think that impacted me more than I thought it did. Yeah. I don't always do it. I'm not like the best at practicing, but every now and then I'll be like, wait, let me like tune out of my phone and the electronics and the busyness and tune into like what's around me.
Yeah. I think that series was good, and there's been aspects of it like I've maintained. I don't know if it started then or a little bit before, but I have a meditation tracker on my phone, and like I've continued, even if it's like 5 minutes a day, like doing something where I'm just quieting myself and connecting and tuning in or engaging or whatever you want to call it, but just like quieting myself for a little bit. And that's been like, one of the things we talked about last night with Gil was like, what do you do when you find yourself stressed and in works and out of rest? And he talked about like pulling back from things, and like it's so important for me. Meditation is important because it gives me perspective. And perspective is something that we talk about a lot, the importance of perspective. But like just that ability to like step back for a second and say, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what's going on. Because sometimes when you're just nose to the wheel, like you don't see that.
Right. Yeah. Very true. Very true. Okay, so then I guess we're just doing a 2023 wrapped today, apparently.
That's what it feels like, huh?
It does. It does. So overall, one big takeaway from this year. Maybe give me one word.
Like when I'm thinking about our podcast.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. My hair is doing funny things.
Growth. I mean, that's like when we're looking at the wrapped or the different analytics for the show, it's like our growth was up 999%. Like just insane growth this year. And yes, that's partially because the year before we had almost nothing. Like but still, like that's been such a big part of this year and a big stretch, even just like, okay, like this isn't just friends and family now. What do we do with it?
Yeah. Yeah,
What
that's
about
true.
you?
I think my word would be connection.
Mm.
Um, just like the amount of people that we've been able to connect with that I didn't even know existed. I mean, some of them I did, some of them I didn't. Um, and hearing their perspectives and connecting like truly on a like normal person, human, spiritual basis, I think has been so great. But it's caused growth within me, and it's created community and all of these things. So that's my word is um yeah, connection. Interesting. Josh and I like to joke about, I think I had a friend who told me my fatal flaw in my personality. Have we talked about this before?
I don't know on the show.
Is that I think that everyone wants to be my friend. And every time we have a guest on, I'm like, I think they're totally our friend. But it's always just really good. And it's so cool to meet new people and find a connection point and really hear origin stories and spur one another on. Like, what an amazing thing.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I like to give Kim a hard time, with that every time we're talking to someone, especially if they make a comment like, wow, I feel like we're connected. I like look at her. It's like we know what we're talking about. Uh, but it's kind of amazing the growth in community that we've had.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh. He froze.
So I don't exactly know where that's gonna cut in because my internet cut out. But we were talking about like giving Kim a hard time for her fatal flaw of um, thinking everyone wants to be her friend. But it is so fun, like it's so fun to see that in action. Like I know, like sometimes you call it a fatal flaw. I don't know if it's really a like flaw, but like it's it's fun when that like pops in and people are like, oh yeah, like I feel connected and this is great. And it's like, yeah, that's amazing when you find people like that.
One of my favorite things. I don't think it's actually a fatal flaw. I had a friend who said that once. She's very much into like personality diagnostics. And that's what she called it. And I'm like, I don't think it's a flaw at all.
Yeah.
And I really do think people want to be my. It's hard to have a connection with someone and then be like, but I don't really think we should be friends.
That's true.
Mm, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, if we go back to the tuning in, like that radio concept, the tuning in to like the one mind or the Christ consciousness or quantum entanglement, whatever it is that you want to call it. If we look at that, I mean, there is a connection. So do you want to tap into it or do you not want to tap into it? You know what I mean? I
Mm-hmm.
want to be a part of the bigger whole. I think that's just what it comes down to. So not a flaw. I'm just claiming it right now. It's not a flaw. And it's certainly not fatal.
Right. Mm. Any other like thoughts on from either the episode with Gil or the just year?
Hmm. My only other thought on being on Gil's show was um I just well maybe see I'm going to talk about it again. I'm amazed at the more conversations we have and whether it's on our platform or someone else's platform, um how similar some of our journeys are. They're not the same, but how similar they are, and how nice it is to connect with people who are kind of walking in similar things, you know? There's a solidarity, there's like a brotherhood. I don't know. Yeah. So that's encouraging to me.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it happens sometimes when you're like, just when something's been on your mind and then someone else is having a conversation with that, and it's like, oh, like there's connection there, or you're thinking about your life and how weird it is, and you meet someone else and it's like, oh, their life's been like that too. Like it's not that much of an outlier. Like for some reason it helps ground me when that happens.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Do you have any other takeaways?
Not that's like coming right to my mind, but it was like, yeah, I just think it was fun to have an opportunity to do that, or have another opportunity soon to do that with another podcast. So we'll let you guys know about that when that comes up. But it's fun to bring people here, but it's also fun to be invited to other places. Like it's just different.
Sure, for sure. Yeah.
Mm,
I mean, it's good to have friends of the podcast.
that's right.
Okay. You guys, I think we'll wrap it up there today. We'll see you back next time.
Yeah. Thank you for sticking around. Listen for new episodes every Monday and Thursday. Find us on all social media platforms by searching for Market Mystics. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. Visit upperroomcd.com, where you can find more information about the hosts, projects, and guests. Go deeper by booking a coaching appointment focused on redefining identity and wealth in your life. See you next time.